goals for this summer was to read all of James Baldwin's work. Baldwin has never been out of favor, but his writing is enjoying renewed interest in recent years. The documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, was a critical and commercial success. If Beale Street Could Talk, Baldwin's fifth novel, was made into a film by Barry Jenkins and won an Academy Award. Baldwin has been part of the current national conversation, and it was my desire to read everything that he'd ever published. I decided to start with No Name in the Street, a nonfiction book about the late 60s. On one of the first pages, Baldwin remembers when he was 5 or 6, and his mother said to no one in particular, "I have an idea." She said this at the same moment that she was putting a scrap of black velvet into the closet. James Baldwin says for years he thought an idea was a scrap of black velvet. I loved that moment, the childlike innocence of it. And what it makes me think about is how influential we are to each other, on our children, for sure, but also on our friends, other adults. An idea, an injury, an image can stay with us for years, if not for a lifetime. This brings me to my novel, No One Is Coming to Save Us, which counts as its main influences, The Great Gatsby. The novel has been called a reboot of The Great Gatsby, but it isn't at all. It's not a retelling in any way. Before the novel was published, someone asked me what I was writing about, and I said I'm writing about a poor family in rural North Carolina set in the very recent past, and they're Black. In other words, I'm rewriting The Great Gatsby. I was joking, but the novel is very much inspired by the main urge in Gatsby, and that's a return home and the irrepressible drive to create what feels like a family. The idea of that green light in Gatsby has captivated and intrigued readers for nearly 100 years, and it means so much more than a light on a dock. What's interesting and exciting to me as a writer are quiet collisions of everyday life, race, class, gender. The stories I write are about the strangeness of that everyday. I think reading and writing are hopeful acts. We do both to explain the world. We explain it to others. We explain it to ourselves. We need stories to recommit ourselves to a time and a place and to reinforce our shared humanity. We are all here on the planet at the same moment, and it's fascinating and illuminating to fill in the gaps of what we know about each other. No One Is Coming to Save Us is about that everyday, the domestic, the sphere that typically women know. I don't think that F. Scott Fitzgerald and Gatsby planned to write about race or planned to write about women, not in particular. And in fact, he said in a letter to his editor, Maxwell Perkins, that he probably should have written about women because it might have sold better. But Fitzgerald was writing about the striving outsider. It's a story about trying to love who you are, but about the desperate lengths that we go to be somebody else and to finally not be that person who's always outside. But most of all, Gatsby is about the seeker's earnest attempt to find a place in a changing world. My book showcases women like me, like my mother, like my grandmothers, women who felt trapped by their ignorance of the world, by their own bodies, by their men. My women aim for escape, not necessarily the literal geographical space. The women in my novel are the ones who stayed in the South, not the nearly 50% who migrated to the North over the last century, but they are the ones who stayed. But they wanted to escape the confines of their history and their own thinking. Many things about Gatsby feel like Baldwin's scrap of black velvet to me. Like most teenagers who read the novel, I was taken with the parties, the glamour, the beautiful people, the love story, the idea that someone would remember you and come back for you no matter how long or how far away you were. But what struck me most in the novel, in The Great Gatsby, is the language about the longing of the characters, their desperate desire to forge their own American dream. Jay Gatsby becomes a new person. He sheds all vestiges of his former life. He is no longer Gats, the name he was born with. He is Gatsby, man without a past. The women in my book can't reinvent in the same way, but they are no less complicated and no less strange. I'm interested in the stories that weren't told about the women in this book, the mostly silent objects of desire. What does their American dream look like, and how do they create it? The stories I want to tell are coming-of-age stories in a way. We typically think of coming-of-age stories as stories about adolescence, about kids trying to figure out how not to be kids anymore. We never fully figure out how to be in the world, and that's why I like the idea that all of us are always coming of age. I heard someone say one time that she was 40 years old and she looked around at the world and realized that she knew practically nothing, and that she felt the way that she felt when she was a kid, when she was actually a preteen and a teenager. And I thought that is such a beautiful way to think about your becoming in the world, that you're always learning and that what you don't know always outpaces what you do. So I want to read just a few um, short passages from the book. And this is a story in large part that is a story about love, but it's not about the fantasy of love. It's about the desire from the point of view of America's cheap seats. That so once that bubble of fantasy is popped, that's where I wanted my story to start. I wanted a story about uncommon desire. I wanted it set in the home pastures of North Carolina. My characters are past Jim Crow, but they still feel its lingering effects. They are post-segregation, but they see the color line drawn everywhere in their town. The setting is after the heyday of the furniture industry, and places like the town that I grew up in and that I'm from, Lenore, North Carolina, have been hit very hard by mechanization, technology, about plants moving from the South and into other parts of the world. So I will start with just the beginning of the novel. And this part of the novel introduces three of the main characters. And there's a couple named Sylvia and Don. And there's the long lost and now returned character Jay, who is now building a home in the community that he left many years before, a generation before. The house he's building is done mostly. All that's missing now is the prettying, stain on the sprawling deck, final finishing inside. At least that's what they say. This house has been the talk around our small town. Not much happens here, but the same. A 13-year-old girl waiting for the baby her mother's sorry boyfriend gave her. The husband we wanted to believe was good found out to be the worst kind, with a whole family 2 towns over. The same stupid surprises, the usual sadnesses. But this thing is strange. The boy we all saw grow up came back to us slim and hungry gaunt like a coal miner with money. J.J. Ferguson made it. The poor boy who lived with his grandmother, dead for years now, the ordinary boy we all fed when he wouldn't leave at dinner time, looking like he was waiting for someone to ask him to play. We had no idea. JJ was the newest resident on Brushy Mountain Road. His car, they say, or at least the car they say was his, is parked on the long driveway most mornings until evening while he worked alongside the Mexican men he hired. Every town has a section where the people are rich and their lives so far from yours, you almost expect them to speak another tongue. Brushy Mountain was that place for us. You can't help but get quiet on the road, like your noisy breathing might disturb the beauty, rupture the holy calm that order and clean create. When we were young, we used to love to see the houses, all lit up with their curtains and blinds open, glowing yellow like sails of a ship in the faraway ocean. If we went slow enough, we could see the brilliant colors of their decorated rooms, their floor-to-ceiling bookcases and furniture, floral designs on their wallpaper you couldn't get at the regular store. We might even get a glimpse of one of them, sipping from a mug, snuggled into a chair. Though we knew they lived among us, bought white bread and radial tires like the rest of us, we loved the proof of them. I see him with my own eyes. We breathed in the houses, dreamed about the ones that would have been ours if our lives had run in different directions, if we'd had different faces, if we'd made all the right choices. The first thing JJ did on that mountain was cut out a whole new road up to his house. With heavy machines of industry, Kubotas and Deeres, they dotted the path for weeks like kids' toys in the weeds. Men in town speculated about the tons of gravel, the weight of red clay they had to shift from one place to level the hills. The women didn't care about the road. They knew from their own yards how difficult it was to make a way to get from there to here. They dug their own paths, moved their own dirt and rocks in the stubborn Carolina soil. What excited the women was the river rock foundation, the beautiful windows, the walls rising up like raptured dead. Most days, JJ would be up there himself, walking around the site, talking to the men, or working hard, judging by the sweat-soaked clothes, his close-cropped hair grayed with sawdust. Living in a small town means knowing the news, the broad strokes, as well as the lurid minutia of your neighbor's life. Your dirty kitchen, cancer treatments, drugged out child, all on the sandwich board of your back, swirled around the body with a stink you could not outrun. JJ was from another small town and did not have nearby family. Few people knew JJ to give out too many details. We are not surprised. We knew too little about him when he lived here as a young man. But soon he would show his face. When that house was done, Sylvia knew JJ would be knocking at her door. Years ago, that boy had spent much too much time in her kitchen, on her back porch, staring at her beautiful child, Ava. That JJ had loved Ava was obvious. That Sylvia loved JJ too, like a son, like Devon, her own son, was just as clear. Her son was Devon, pronounced like Levon. Devon was her firstborn baby, the one she wasn't supposed to have. She never had any romance about being a mother and knew that having a baby was easy if your body was willing. Girls hardly older than the one Sylvia passed at the school bus stop at the end of the road every morning became mothers. But Sylvia's body had not been willing until Devon came. She was 30, old in those days, and sure that her baby days were long past. It wasn't that Sylvia loved Devon any more than her daughter, Ava, but Devon was the child that changed her status, the child that made her look at the ordinary world as a big and dangerous paradise. JJ was so much like Devon, both calm boys, funny children with soft voices, with the same warm, puddled eyes like they'd been caught crying and they were trying to recover. Almost a generation had passed, a long time, any way you look at it, but Sylvia knew that the feelings were just there under the pancake makeup of the surface. JJ felt them too. How could he not? He had left them, but he was back. That counted. Of course it counted. They used to say, if you love something, set it free. Don't you believe it? Love means never letting anything go, never seeing it stride on confident legs away from you. You think love leaves? You think you're ever free? Then you're a child or a fool. Flee in the dark, spend a lifetime away, never say its name, never say its name. But one day, or if you are very unlucky, every day, it will whisper yours, and you know you want to hear your name. Say it, love. Please say it.